Hello, and welcome back to James and the Frames. The highly and nervously anticipated live-action Cowboy Bebop adaptation has been on Netflix for a little while now, so I feel like it's as good of a time as any to talk about why I think this show needs a second season.
Boy, have you lost your mind, cause I'll help you find it.
Now, I know that there are a lot of people out there who really don't like the show. A large majority of the Bebop fanbase does not want to jam with this adaptation. I get it. There are some major differences between the original anime and the Netflix adaptation, some that I don't fully agree with either. But I also don't fully agree with what is being said negatively about this show. The show is actually really fun and entertaining, and it might just be the best Western anime adaptation of all time. In all honesty, this adaptation does have its flaws. There are character arcs and story beats that didn't quite hit the mark, and some of the episodes went on for a little too long. But there are also some really great aspects that, in my personal opinion, greatly overshadow these flaws. I went into this show having seen the anime a little over a year ago, so I was familiar with all the major plot points from the original, and some notable characters, but the entire show wasn't constantly at the front of my mind while watching the Netflix adaptation. I went in with what some may describe as a casual fan perspective, even though Cowboy Bebop is one of my favorite shows of all time. So, in case you're still beyond disbelief, yes, I've seen the original show. So, let's jam, shall we? Starting off with the big one, the main cast. John Cho, Mustafa Shakir, and Daniela Pineda are all amazing as Spike, Jet, and Faye. I really can't see anybody else playing these roles. John Cho embodies the coolness and stoic nature of Spike incredibly well, and to those who are criticizing the way that Spike fights in this show, saying that it isn't majestic or fluid enough, that's in part with the show not being animated. There are a lot of things that can be captured through animation that can't be captured through a camera shooting at 24 frames per second. Having Spike in this adaptation being a bit more jagged and rough in his fighting style is totally fine for this version of the character. Maybe he's using a different style of martial arts than his animated counterpart. This Spike is a bit more rugged and weathered than the one we know from the anime, and I like that characterization. And regarding the whole fearless name change aspect, I think it's a really interesting way to show Spike's dynamic with Vicious. Honestly, it shows it crystal clear. Simply put, Spike is the way he is, fearless, because he isn't vicious by nature, and Vicious isn't fearless because he is vicious. He's afraid of losing everything, and Spike almost has nothing to lose. Their relationship is something I 100% want to see deepened in Season 2. Faye is also portrayed very well. Daniela Pineda really nails her cocky attitude and eventually the vulnerability of Faye's character once we start to discover her past. She never felt annoying or anything of the sort, and by the end of the season, I had grown more attached to her character than I thought. If there's a single episode that encapsulates her performance, it would have to be Episode 4. If I said that I wasn't grinning for the entire opening half of that episode due to how great she was, I'd be a liar.
No, Ron! We needed her!
Which brings me to my favorite character in this adaptation, Mustafa Shakir as Jet Black. He is hands down the most entertaining character to watch in this adaptation. Not even because his voice sounds exactly like the English dub from the original show, but due to the way his character is written and the way in which he portrays this version of Jet. Him having a daughter adds an extra layer of emotion to his character, and I thought that what they did with that dynamic was really good. The depths he goes to with Spike in the story are surprisingly compelling, and again, by the end of the season, I was more than intrigued to see where they'd take that story thread. Another thing I must note is that this show is f***ing hilarious.
Mushy mushy.
Some people might not care for campy dialogue, but with the tone of this show and the way it's presented, moments like add so much more to that experience. To sidetrack a little more here, and to reiterate, I'm viewing this adaptation as so. These are the characters from Cowboy Bebop thrown into a new narrative. I have never seen an anime adaptation that has a different story with such a unique and enjoyable feel. In case you haven't noticed already, I really like this show. As for the supporting characters in this adaptation, specifically Vicious and Julia, they do a great job too. with what they're given. As much as I like their casting, the way in which their characters were used didn't stick the landing for me. Vicious and Julia are in this show way too much, which isn't a terrible thing. I like the idea of exploring mysterious characters in previous works and expanding upon them. The thing is, the show don't tell approach here doesn't really fit these characters. In the anime, Vicious was only present for a few episodes, and it was his sinister presence that really made his character a compelling villain. Whenever Spike and Vicious would confront each other, the amount of tension and brutal action that would follow would be nothing less than enthralling. In this show, they do get those moments, but not with the same electric feeling that the anime possessed. Yet, these moments are still fairly gripping, including the first encounter between Vicious and Spike. Sure, their conflict was set up in a different way than we would have expected, and most of it is fleshed out alright through the amount of backstory we get. Their story is a lot more emotional this time around than we've seen before. The issue here is the amount of backstory we get. And again, the saying show don't tell can be applied both ways here, in how much we get to see of both Vicious and Julia's backstories. Aside from that, however, both actors do an amazing job. There were indeed scenes where I saw the brutality and evil shine in Vicious's eyes, with one of the most memorable in the show being how he stands up to the elders. These characters have the potential to be good. It's just a matter of finding the right footing for them, more so in the case of Julia. And this is another aspect of the show that I agree does not fit the narrative, which is Julia's sudden turn at the end of episode 10. Regardless of how her character was presented in the anime, the arc she goes through in this adaptation is related to being trapped in this abusive relationship with Vicious and wanting to escape the syndicate. Through her performance and the lines she says, I would have thought that when she shot Vicious in episode 10, that she would instantly want to run away with Spike and survive. But instead of running free, she traps Vicious and shoots Spike out the window. That's honestly a dark turn faster than Daenerys in Game of Thrones. The shooting Spike part I can partially understand, but wanting to take control of the syndicate and have Vicious as her prisoner didn't really settle with me. But there's an avenue for this relationship in season 2 that they can go down, which I will get to in a second here, right after a word from our sponsors. Oh yeah, I actually don't have any sponsors. Since I'm already on the topic of episode 10, which is tied with episode 1 as my favorite episode of the season, let's take a look at what threads are left open and the new ones that are introduced. One of the most compelling relationships in the show is between Jed and Spike. Their chemistry is on point, I cared about them, and I was invested in the whole idea of Spike keeping his past identity from him, with the truth slowly being revealed until the final episode. The way their relationship is left off in such a bittersweet way makes me want to see how they mend their wounds in season 2. Which brings me to the most exciting storyline set up in this finale, one that, if executed well, could most definitely propel this show to greater heights. But first, I have to talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the Edphalance. I'm sorry, I deeply apologize for that. In the final minute of the show, we're introduced to this adaptation's version of Edward. And a lot of people are hating on it way too much. I understand that not having a fan favorite character show up for an entire season and be on screen for 40 seconds in such a manner would be demoralizing. I get that. I also understand that there isn't as much of a build-up as there was in the anime, when Ed was mentioned as this master hacker only to be revealed as some quirky kid. This adaptation kind of does that with a throwaway line in one episode, but it never really points towards Ed making an appearance. Again, I get that. But what I don't understand is how people are talking about the way in which Ed is portrayed. Eden Perkins is an amazing choice for Ed, and does the absolute best they can in the short time they're given. This introduction, while not being as built up or coherent as the anime, is still pretty well done and important. Is she a bit obnoxious and cartoony? Yes, because she's supposed to be that way in this adaptation. In my mind, this interaction is akin to a young kid freaking out over meeting with what seems like one of their idols, which is a bit awkward, sure.
Spike! Cowboy! Bounty hunter for hire! Wake up!
But I think that it's intentional. Plus, Spike's reaction pretty much mirrors what we as the audience might think of her on a first viewing.
Boo! Danger, danger!
What made Ed so great in the original show, of course, was the way in which she was animated. She was very expressive and kind of all over the place. This is the same point I mentioned with Spike's fighting style in this adaptation. This adaptation can present Ed in a new way. From what I see here, Ed surely is a bit annoying in her first scene. It also looks like she's in a different role than she was in the anime. I think this version of Ed will start out more talkative and annoying, but I think she'll grow on us. And if you're basing this small interaction on how Ed will be for the show's entirety, I have one thing to say to you. Wait. If this show is given a second season, I promise that this iteration of the character will grow on you in probably the same way that Ed did in the anime. I'll be completely honest, when I was first introduced to her in the original, my immediate thoughts were, wait, what? This is the radical Edward that was built up all this time? Who is this kid? What is her place in this story? And lo and behold, over the course of many an episode, she grew on me. And I believe that she has the potential to do so during a second season because of what is revealed during her first interaction with Spike.
Bad man's big reward! We have to find the butterfly man! Boo! Danger, danger! We have to find Villager!
For those of you who don't know what this means, the Butterfly Man is an alias of the main villain in the Cowboy Bebop feature film, Vincent Villaju. This is, without a doubt, the best way to set up a Season 2. If Season 2 has Vincent as the main villain, it gives the entire Bebop crew the perfect time to bond, without a plot thread as big as the Syndicate's to interfere. Now, here's where I get into Vicious and Julia. If they are less of a focus in Season 2 and are put in the background while we get to see more of the crew's adventures and experiences against a villain that isn't directly related to either of them, there is more than enough room for these characters to shine and interact. Also, I feel like Vincent would be the perfect contrast to Spike's character, more so than Vicious in this adaptation. A scarred veteran of the Titan War out for revenge. If there's a single quote that surmises this incredibly well, it would be this one.
I have no fear of death. It just means dreaming in silence. A dream that lasts for eternity.
You're an original, aren't you?
I highly recommend to those who haven't seen the Cowboy Bebop film to watch it after this character's tease. His dynamic with Spike there is extremely compelling, and I feel like it would translate better to live action, especially with this iteration of Spike. Which brings me back one last time to Vicious and Julia. Look, the way their characters were left off might be a bit underwhelming, but bear with me. Like I mentioned before, if Vincent is the main villain of Season 2, this gives everything having to do with the Syndicates time to breathe and remain in the background where it kind of belongs for the time being. One of the main conflicts with this adaptation is that it focuses way too much on the larger conflict, and that it's a lot better drawing from the anthology-like structure the original had, because the standalone sequences and episodes here work really well. One prime example is the opening sequence of the show. While it is clearly influenced by the opening scene of the Cowboy Bebop movie, it's such a fresh take on the action and style of the original, and it made me believe that I can accept this adaptation as its own show. It works. Seriously, imagine yourself having never seen Cowboy Bebop. You haven't seen a trailer, you haven't seen a clip, you haven't seen anything. Imagine you're 50 years old and you've never seen any anime in your life, and you're tuning in to this live-action adaptation of Cowboy Bebop, and this is the first scene you see.
I came here to place a bet.
But James, you may be starting to type up. The movie version is better because Spike lures the robbers away from the register with his headphones on and takes care of them. Then when it's down to him and the last robber who has an old lady hostage, he delivers a couple lines that makes the guy point the gun at him and then he disarms him. Yes, this version is pretty damn good. And with the adaptation, yes, it's similar writing, but not a similar setting. I think there's a big difference between a casino robbery and a drugstore robbery. Spike does distract the bad guys with his headphones, but it's not like he could wander over to a slot machine and lure the guys there. Plus, the whole coin flip and roundhouse kick and jumping into the action is so cool. Then we get to the gun pointing scene where Spike comes off as a bit more sarcastic and definitely more sardonic. And for this rugged characterization of Spike, and again for the tone of the show, I was completely fine with it. Plus, Spike does inadvertently save her by shooting the guy with the disruptor, so there you go. And I will say, this following shot is absolutely f***ing gorgeous. This adaptation has something special, and it's also pretty damn good when viewed as its own show. And since it leads right into the intro after this, and I know the intro is a big topic of discussion, I really love the intro for this show as well. And I also loved how they had different variations of Tank for some episodes. How a certain bass line or sax solo would lead into the intro. The intro itself is still an absolute banger and it looks incredible. Are there corny lines of dialogue?
Sounds to me like blackmail.
I'm writing this because, Jack, you are black and you are male.
Yes, but it didn't suck me out of the experience. Are there some risks taken that move the pieces of the original story around? Yes, but here's what I think is the coolest thing about this adaptation. We have no idea how the story can go from here, and I, for one, really want to see where this show goes, because it truly gives me hope for Western anime adaptations. I know that we're all scarred after
Northwest Ferris wheel mysteriously collapses. She pulls the page with my name on it, and it is ultimately consumed by fire. Although her boyfriend lands safely in the water, Mia strikes the shoreline, dying instantly.
You're the guy. You're help.
Rotten mistakes.
There is no doubt in my mind that it will be the best Netflix anime adaptation of all time. And if you're about to watch it for the first time, whether you've seen the anime beforehand or not, give it a chance, because I think that it deserves it. And hey,
Whatever happens, happens.
thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you after the credits.